The handcuffs were too tight, and my coffee was cold, and I had been staring at the same patch of gray wall for 40 minutes. That was my situation. That was the whole of it. The three aliens on the other side of the room were arguing. I could tell it was an argument because the long, gravel-gargling sounds they made kept getting louder and then quieter and then louder again, the way arguments do when nobody is winning. Their skin was the color of old bark, cracked and ridged along the jaw and down the neck, and they had too many fingers. I counted 8 on the one closest to me. I tried not to stare. My mother raised me better than that. My name is Mara Kowalski, Staff Sergeant, Earth Defense Corps, 7 years of service, currently attached to the diplomatic escort unit because my commanding officer said I had, quote, a talent for staying calm in rooms where calm was the most dangerous thing you could offer. I took it as a compliment. I was starting to think I had misunderstood him. The ship I was on was not a human ship. I knew that the second I came around because human ships smell like recycled air and burned coffee and mild existential dread. This ship smelled like a library that had been soaking in rain for 100 years. Old paper, stone, something else I could not name. I shifted my wrists against the pipe. The cuffs held. They were not human-made cuffs, which meant they were not designed around human bone structure, which meant they were just slightly too narrow and just slightly too tight, and if I stayed in them another few hours, I was going to lose feeling in both hands. The aliens had not looked at me directly in 40 minutes. Not once. I thought at first it was a cultural thing. Some species do not make eye contact. Some find it threatening, some find it rude, some just do not have eyes that work in the same direction as ours. I had read the briefings. I had done the training. I was prepared for a wide range of alien behavior. I was not prepared for the sliding. One of them, the shortest one, the one who made the quietest sounds, came toward me eventually. It was carrying a container of something that steamed. Food, maybe, or a beverage, or something that passed for both in whatever culture these beings came from. And instead of walking up to me, instead of crouching down, instead of doing anything that involved closing the distance between us, it put the container on the floor and used a long, thin rod to push it across the room toward me. A 3-foot rod. It stopped well back from where I could reach. I looked at the container. I looked at the rod. I looked at the alien, which immediately stopped looking at me. I said, I cannot reach that. None of them responded. Either the translator on my wrist was not working, or they did not care, or they did not speak standard, which was possible, this far out of map space. I looked at the container again. It was still steaming. Whatever was in it smelled faintly like anise and copper, and I decided I was not hungry anyway. The argument picked up again. I went back to studying the wall. The door opened an hour later. I know it was an hour because I had been counting my own heartbeats, which is something you learn to do in the field when there is nothing else to count, and the silence is starting to make you nervous. 58 beats per minute. I was either very calm or very bored, and I had stopped being able to tell the difference years ago. The one who came through the door was different from the 3 I had been watching. Older. The ridges on its jaw were deeper, more pronounced, and it carried itself the way soldiers carry themselves regardless of planet of origin, that specific weight in the shoulders, that specific economy of movement, nothing wasted, nothing decorative. It had markings along its neck that could have been scars or rank insignia or both. Probably both. It crossed the room. It came closer than the others had, maybe 4 feet. Still too far to touch me, which I was beginning to notice was a very consistent distance everyone on the ship maintained. It looked at me. I looked back. It said one word in standard, heavily accented, shaped by a mouth that was not built for the sounds, but standard nonetheless. Kailvareth. I had no idea what that meant. It was not in any of my briefing documents. It was not a name I recognized. It was not a place, not a greeting, nothing. My training gave me a box to put it in. I said, I do not know what that is. The alien said nothing. It just looked at me with an expression I could not read, because reading alien expressions is a skill that takes years, and I had been conscious for approximately 90 minutes on this ship, and all of my focus had been on not losing circulation in my hands. But something in that expression made the back of my neck go cold. Not fear exactly, older than fear, the thing that lives underneath fear. Then one of the others knocked something off the table. A tablet. It hit the floor with a flat crack and slid across the smooth surface and stopped against my boot. Every alien in the room went still. Not quiet, still. The kind of still that is different from quiet the way a held breath is different from silence. 3 beings and the older one, and every single one of them stopped moving and stopped making sound, and I swear on my service record that none of them breathed. I looked down at the tablet. I looked up at them. I picked it up. The reaction was immediate and involuntary and deeply strange. The shortest one took 2 steps backward without appearing to decide to. The one nearest the door shifted its weight toward the door. The older one, the decorated one, the one who had spoken my first alien word at me, its hands moved. Not toward me. Away. Both hands raised slightly, palms out, which is a gesture of non-aggression in at least 12 of the 20 species I had been briefed on, and which meant that even across all the biology and the light years, and whatever I had clearly missed in my training, it was saying, easy, easy, easy. To me. As though I was the threat. I looked at the tablet in my hands. It had activated when I touched it, which meant it read human bioelectric signatures, which meant someone had programmed it to do that, which meant this was not an accident, which meant a lot of things I did not want to think about yet. The screen was full of text I could not read, alien script, columns and columns of it. But at the bottom of the screen, because someone had set the translation layer to remain active, there was standard text, a registry, species names down the left column, classifications down the right. I scrolled. Most of the classifications were numbers, category 1 through 6 with short descriptors, diplomatic, mercantile, territorial, aggressive contained. A few were flagged with colors. Yellow, orange, one dark red with a long description I did not have time to read. I scrolled to the H section. I found Earth, I found humans, I found the classification column. Category Omega. Below it, a warning glyph I had never seen in any briefing material. Below that, a mandatory buffer zone, 14 light years. Below that, a reason field. Sealed HFY Council. Authorized eyes only. I sat with that for a moment, the tablet warm in my hands, the room completely silent behind me. 14 light years. A classification that did not fit the scale of the other numbers, a reason nobody was allowed to read. I looked up. 4 aliens, every one of them watching me the way you watch something you are not sure is going to move. I had spent my entire life assuming that if we ever met something out here, something that crossed the stars and found us, we would be the small ones, the ones who did not know enough, the ones who needed to be careful. I had never once considered the alternative. I put the tablet down slowly. I kept my movements very deliberate. I held completely still. None of them relaxed. I had always assumed if aliens showed up, they would be the scary ones. The debrief room on the HFY vessel had a single light source positioned above the center table, and it cast shadows the wrong way, upward instead of down, which I found more disorienting than anything else that had happened in the previous 4 hours. I sat across from a HFY officer whose name, when translated, came out approximately as Vessel Commander Gorath, and who had the decorum to maintain only a 2-foot distance from me, which I suspected cost him something. He spoke standard better than the older one had, not fluent, but functional. He had clearly practiced. "You are being returned," he said, "to your people now." "Returned," I said, "not rescued." He did not answer that. He looked at a point slightly to the left of my face, which I was learning was the Vethkai version of direct eye contact. There was an error in judgment. By members of this vessel's crew, you were not to be collected. Collected, I said. Taken, you were not to be taken. Why not? He looked at the table, protocol. He was not going to give me more than that. I could see it in the set of his jaw, in the careful blank quality of his expression. Whatever the protocol was, whatever it covered, he was not authorized to explain it to me, and he was not going to step outside his authorization for a human he had known for 4 hours. I understood that. I respected it, actually. Following protocol under pressure is not nothing. I said, "What does Kael'vareth mean?" The question landed differently than I expected. He did not look at the table this time. He looked at me. Directly. For a full 3 seconds, which in Vethkai social terms I later learned is the equivalent of grabbing someone by the collar. Who said that word to you? Your senior officer, whoever he is, the one with the neck markings. Elder Commander Vel, he said. He should not have said that word. But he did, so what does it mean? A long pause. The upward cast shadows moved slightly as the ship adjusted its position. Somewhere in the hull, something hummed. It is a very old word, Goreth said. Pre-registry. It does not translate cleanly. Try. He was quiet for another moment. Then, the thing that learns from pain and then becomes it. I sat with that. The thing that learns from pain and then becomes it. I thought about the registry, category Omega, 14 light-years of mandatory distance. A reason sealed behind council authorization. I thought about the way every alien on that ship moved around me, not with hostility, not with contempt, but with the specific careful respect you give to something that can hurt you without meaning to. The way you move around high-voltage equipment, not because it wants to harm you, because it does not know its own current. Goreth stood up. The debrief was over. I had been given exactly as much as he had decided I could have. There will be a formal statement from the Vethkai Council, he said. Diplomatic channels, an acknowledgement of the error. Okay, I said. You should know, he stopped, started again. The faction responsible, they believed the classification was outdated. They believed your species had changed. Changed how? Softened, he said. The word sat in the air between us like something that had been dropped. I looked at him, had we? He did not answer, he walked to the door. I said, the ones who took me, were they enemies of mine? He stopped, his hand on the door frame, the upward shadows on his face. No, he said, they were the ones who thought you were safe. The shuttle back to human space was small and fast and smelled like burned circuits and 3-day-old protein rations, and I cannot tell you how glad I was to breathe that smell. I sat in the cargo seat, and I did not sleep, and I watched the stars move. Every species had a number, 1 through 6, diplomatic, mercantile, territorial, aggressive. We had a symbol. We had a seal. 6,000 years. The whole galaxy had a sign on us, and not one of us had ever known it was there. I thought about every history class I had ever sat through, the wars, the near misses, the centuries we spent trying to end ourselves and failing and going again. I thought about what Goreth had said. The faction that took me had believed we had softened, that the classification was a relic, that whatever we had been 6,000 years ago, we were not that anymore. They had wanted to prove it. They had been the optimists. That was the part I kept turning over. Not the ones who feared us, not the ones who wanted the buffer zone wider and the seal tighter. The ones who took me, the ones who put me in a room with a 3-foot feeding rod and backed against the walls. They were the ones who thought we were fine now, manageable, ready for renegotiation. And they were still too afraid to come within arm's reach. I did not sleep. I watched the stars. I tried to figure out what I was supposed to feel about all of it and came up mostly empty, which was fine. I had learned a long time ago that feelings have their own schedule, and showing up early to demand them does not work. The shuttle docked at Forward Station Kepler. Colonel Ewan was waiting at the airlock. He was a small man with very good posture and the expression of someone who had been expecting bad news and had decided to be calm about it in advance. He said, "You holding up?" I said, "Did you know?" He did not ask what I meant. He just said, "Walk with me." His office was on the 3rd level, overlooking the docking bay. He poured 2 cups of actual coffee, the real kind, and gave me one and sat down across from me and looked at his cup for a moment before he looked at me. "The classification has been in our intelligence files for 11 years, he said. "Category Omega, buffer zone, the SEAL. We found it when we started mapping galactic registry infrastructure, above my clearance to brief field personnel." "Why?" "Because the last time a human unit was briefed on how certain species perceive us, 3 of them responded by becoming significantly more aggressive in contact situations. One started a diplomatic incident that took 8 months to resolve." He drank his coffee. "The information changes behavior, and changed behavior confirms the classification." I thought about that. I thought about what I would have done differently on that ship if I had known. If I had known the fear in that room was directed at me. If I had known what Kale Vareth meant before Elder Commander Vel said it. I thought about the way my hands had gone still on that tablet, deliberate, careful, like I was diffusing something. Maybe I had been. "Kale Vareth," I said, "the thing that learns from pain and then becomes it." Ewan nodded slowly. "There are older translations. The Dravathi who predate the registry, their version of the phrase is closer to the wound that keeps adapting." He set his cup down. 6,000 years ago there was a species called the Rath Salkai, highly advanced. They decided to run an experiment on early humanity, a contact event, unannounced. They wanted to study how a primitive species responded to overwhelming force. The room was very quiet. "They were not around long enough to publish their findings," he said. "Not because we destroyed them, because the disease vectors they introduced tried to eliminate us, and instead we developed immunity responses that the Rath Salkai biology could not match. They had started a biological arms race they did not understand. Their own biosphere could not keep up. They collapsed from the inside." I drank my coffee. "We did not do anything to them," Ewan said. "We just survived. We adapted so fast and so completely that their own attempt to remove us became a tool we turned against them without meaning to. And the rest of the galaxy watched that happen, and they made a category for it, and they put us in it, and they drew a 14 light-year circle around our system and wrote, 'Do not touch.' I thought about every generation of humans that had lived and died inside that circle, every war we had fought among ourselves, every plague we had pushed through, every century we had nearly not made it and then gotten up again anyway. All of it happening inside a buffer zone that the rest of the galaxy had agreed on without asking us. The ones who took me," I said, "they wanted to prove the classification was outdated." "Yes." "They thought we had changed." "Yes." "Had we?" Ewan looked at me for a long time, the kind of look that is not an answer but is also not nothing. "You were in a room full of beings that were afraid of you," he said. "You cataloged your environment, you identified the exits, you noted the feeding distance, you tracked the power dynamics, you stayed calm." He paused. "How much of that was training and how much was just you?" I did not answer. He nodded like I had. The council chamber on Station Kepler had been repurposed from a cargo bay 3 years ago when the diplomatic contact program expanded, and they ran out of actual meeting rooms. It still had the cargo bay ceiling, 12 feet of reinforced composite with the original loading rig tracks visible at the top. And someone had hung pale blue fabric from the tracks to make it feel less industrial, which mostly just made it feel like a cargo bay that was embarrassed about itself. 17 species, 29 representatives. Some of them I recognized from briefings. Most I did not. They had been assembled in 72 hours, which in galactic diplomatic terms was the equivalent of everyone dropping what they were doing and running. The news of what the Vethkai faction had done had moved faster than my shuttle. I sat at the human table. There were 4 of us. Me, Colonel Ewan, a diplomat named Grace Holt who had 17 years of contact experience, and the specific tired patience of someone who had been doing this long enough to stop being surprised, and a xenolinguist named Owen Marsh, who looked approximately 22 years old, and was currently the foremost expert on Drevathi pre-registry dialect in human space. The representative from the Gaori collective opened. 7 limbs, each one moving slightly independently, like weather. Its translation came through my earpiece in a voice that was smooth and unhurried and very precisely chosen. We wish to express that our concern is not with the individual human present, it said. Our concern is systemic. The category Omega classification exists for reasons the Vethkai faction chose to disregard. The consequences of that disregard must be addressed. Grace Holt leaned forward very slightly. I had been watching her since we sat down, and I had already learned that when she leaned forward, something precise was about to come out of her mouth. We appreciate the Gaori's concern for protocol, she said. Perhaps the Council could clarify which consequence it finds most troubling, the fact that a human was taken, or the fact that she was returned unharmed. The room shifted, not physically. The quality of attention in it shifted the way temperature shifts before a storm. Several translators chirped at once. The Gaori representative's limbs stilled briefly. Both events carry implications. They do, Grace agreed. She did not elaborate. She sat back. The silence she left was doing exactly the work she had designed it to do. I was starting to understand why she had 17 years of experience. The Shreth delegate spoke next. The Shreth were new to me, not in any of my standard briefing materials, which meant they were either very recently contacted or very deliberately obscure. Their representative was small, dense, wrapped in something that looked like dark fabric but moved like liquid. When it spoke, the translator took longer than usual, 2 full seconds of delay, which meant the linguistic gap was significant. The classification must be revised, it said. Upward or removed. Outdated framework. Stasis does not serve the community. Owen Marsh, the young linguist, pulled up something on his tablet and passed it to me without looking away from the room. I glanced at it. A file on the Shreth. Recently contacted 6 years ago. No prior conflict with humanity. Strong military infrastructure. Strong opinion about galactic registry classifications. I looked at the Shreth delegate. It was watching me. Not with the fear I had seen on the Vethkai ship, with something else. Calculation. Grace was speaking again, something careful about review processes and timelines, and I was half listening because the other half of my attention was on the back of the room, where the Drevathi elder sat. I had not noticed it when we came in. It was seated at the far end of the chamber, behind the main delegation rows, in a position that was technically observer status. The Drevathi did not hold council seats. They were too old for that, too far outside the current political architecture. They attended as witnesses, as the living memory of a galactic community that had gone through many iterations before arriving at this one. This one was very old. The oldest living Drevathi I had ever seen in a briefing photo, and this one made those look young. Its skin was translucent in places, the internal structures faintly visible underneath, and it had 4 eyes positioned in a complete circle around its head so that it saw everything in every direction at once. It was looking at me. Not with fear, not with calculation, with something that took me a long time to name because it was not an expression I had ever expected to receive from something that had watched species rise and fall for longer than human civilization had existed. Recognition. It looked at me the way you look at something you have been waiting to see for a very long time. The argument in the room had grown. The Shreth delegate was speaking faster. 2 other representatives had joined the side pushing for classification revision. The fierce side, the ones who wanted the buffer zone doubled, were speaking louder to compensate. Grace was managing it with the specific skill of someone diffusing multiple things simultaneously, but I could see in the set of her shoulders that she was calculating how much longer she could hold the balance. Owen passed me another note, handwritten this time, on actual paper, because he did not want it on a device that could be read. It said, "The Shreth have been in contact with the faction that took you, 3 months prior." I looked at the Shreth delegate. It was still watching me. The Gaori representative said, loudly enough to cut through the argument, "We must also address the option of reclassification downward, preemptive measures, before the circumstances that created category Omega reassert themselves." The room went quiet. Grace did not lean forward. She sat very still. I knew what preemptive measures meant. I had understood it the moment the Gaori said it, and I suspected everyone else in the room had understood it the moment the Gaori said it, and the 2 seconds of silence that followed were everyone deciding how to respond to a suggestion that was not new but had not been said out loud in this room until now. Preemptive meant before it happens. It meant the thing they feared had not happened yet. It meant they were afraid of something that was still only a possibility. I thought about 6,000 years. I thought about the Wrath Salkai. I thought about what Ewan had told me, that we had not done anything to them, that we had only survived, that our survival had been the thing that unmade them. I thought about what the Dravathi elder at the back of the room had been waiting to see. Grace was speaking, measured, careful, every word selected. I was not listening. I was looking at the old Dravathi in the back of the room, and it was looking at me, and something was being communicated in that look that I did not yet have the language for. Owen passed me a 3rd note. It said, "Dravathi elder has requested to speak, privately, to you, not to the delegation, to you specifically." I looked at the elder, 4 eyes in a circle, all of them on me. I wrote back when. Owen slipped out and came back 2 minutes later. He handed me the note. It said after. The vote on preemptive measures failed. Barely. Grace had done her job. The session closed with a follow-up scheduled for 48 hours out and nothing resolved and everyone deeply uncomfortable, which Grace later told me was the best possible outcome for a first session. I found the Dravathi elder in the small room off the main chamber where they had set up a resting area with atmospheric adjustments for non-standard biology. It was sitting in the corner on something that was not quite a chair. It did not look up when I came in. It already knew I was there. 4 eyes in a circle. I sat across from it. For a long moment it said nothing. The atmospheric processor hummed. The fabric walls of the former cargo bay let in a low vibration from the docking bay below. Then it said, in standards so old and so precisely accented that it sounded like something that had been kept in a jar, "You do not know what you are yet." "I keep hearing that," I said. "You will continue to hear it until you do know, or until it no longer matters." It shifted slightly. I was present when the classification was made. I am the last one present at that council who is still living. I said nothing. "The species that was lost," it said. "The Wrath Salkai, they were not cruel, I want you to know that. They were curious. They believed contact was the natural next step. They believed they could control the terms of it. They couldn't. No one can control the terms of contact with your species," it said. "Not because you are violent. Many species are violent not because you are aggressive. Many species are more aggressive." It paused. "Because you do not stop. Every other species that has suffered at the level your species has suffered collapsed or turned the suffering outward as a weapon. You did neither. You grieved. You argued. You nearly ended several times, and then you continued." The room was very quiet. "We have no framework for that," it said. "Grief as fuel. Continuance as reflex. We gave you the only classification that meant what we needed it to mean. Do not find out what happens when this is pushed all the way. I thought about the vote that had just barely failed in the room next door. I thought about the Shreth delegate and its 3 months of prior contact with the people who took me. I thought about what continuing looked like from the outside. Across 6,000 years, to something old enough to have watched it from the beginning. The ones who took me wanted to prove the warning was outdated, I said. Yes. And the ones who want preemptive measures want to act before the warning proves itself current. Yes. What do you want? It looked at me with all 4 eyes, the recognition in them again, that patient, ancient, waiting thing. I want you to understand what you are, it said, not as a threat, not as a category, as a fact. It was quiet for a moment. You grieve, then you rise. We have watched this for 6,000 years. We are still trying to calculate where it ends. I sat with that for a long time. The fabric walls moved slightly in the recycled air. The docking bay hummed below us. I thought about every human who had ever gotten up after something tried to put them down. Every generation, every century. The ones who did not know they were being watched. The ones who had never heard of Category Omega or the Kailvareth or the 14 light-year circle someone had drawn around our solar system without asking us. They had just gotten up because that was what came next. That was all. I said, does knowing it change anything? The Dravathi elder considered this for a long time. The kind of long time that means the question is real and the answer is being treated with respect. That, it said finally, is what I have been waiting 6,000 years to find out. I was 3 bites into a meal bar and halfway through my 3rd coffee of the day when Owen Marsh found me in the observation corridor and said, "The Shreth moved." He did not elaborate, he did not need to. I was already following him. The tactical room was standing room only by the time we got there. Colonel Ewan was at the main display with Grace Holt and 2 officers from the station defense unit, whose names I did not know, but whose expressions I recognized. The specific look of people who have just received information and are still in the process of deciding what it costs. The display showed a sector map, 3 points of light moving. I said, when? 40 minutes ago, Ewan said. Dropped out of faster-than-light travel inside the buffer zone perimeter, all 3 vessels broadcasting on open channels. What are they broadcasting? Grace answered. A reclassification demand. They're calling it a demonstration. They want the Galactic Council to observe what they call a controlled contact event. I looked at the 3 points of light on the display. They were not heading for the station. They were heading for the shipping lane 2 sectors out, the lane where the civilian transit routes ran. I said, who is on that route right now? Ewan touched the display. A ship tag appeared. The Meridian Cross, civilian transport, capacity 1,400, bound for the outer colony at Kepler 7 with standard cargo manifest and a full passenger load. The room was very quiet. I thought about 1,400 people who had left that morning on a routine transit and had no idea that 3 Shreth warships had just decided they were a demonstration. I thought about the Shreth delegate in the council chamber, the way it had watched me, the calculation in its eyes. Ewan said, we have a 14-minute response window before they are in weapons range of the Meridian Cross. 14 minutes. Everyone in the room was looking at the display. Then several of them were looking at me, and I did not know why until I understood. I was the one who had been in the room. I was the one who had held the tablet. I was the one the Dravathi elder had spoken to privately after the session. I was, in whatever way these things get decided without anyone making a decision, the one this had become about. I said, hail the Shreth vessels. Ewan said, they are not responding to hails. Of course they were not. They did not want a conversation. They wanted a demonstration. They wanted to fire on something human, and they wanted the council watching, and they wanted the result to be a Category Omega entry that said, outdated, harmless, safe for reclassification. They wanted to prove the warning was old. I thought about what that meant, what kind of math that required. You look at 6,000 years of history, at the Rath Salkai, at everything the registry had accumulated and everything the Dravathi elder remembered, and you look at all of it and you decide, not real anymore. I thought about what optimism costs when it is wrong. Get me a line to Central Command, I said. Ewan was already on it. I stood in front of the display and I looked at the 3 points of light, and I thought about 1,400 people on a civilian transport who had packed their bags and kissed whoever they kissed goodbye and walked onto a ship that was supposed to take them somewhere ordinary. The line opened. I said what needed to be said. I said it clearly and I said it briefly, and I did not waste words on context because the people on the other end of that line had access to the same display I did, and they did not need context. They needed a request from someone with field-verified contact experience. I made the request. Then I stood back and I watched the display, and I drank my cold coffee. The Shreth warships reached weapons range at the 11-minute mark. At the 12-minute mark, the Meridian Cross emergency systems activated. Hull plating, shielding. The distress beacon went live. I watched the passenger count update on the secondary display as the crew moved people to emergency positions. 1,400 down to 600 in protected sections, 800 in partial cover. The ship was not built for combat. No civilian transport was, but the crew was doing what crews do, which is use every second they have. At 13 minutes, the Shreth fired. I watched it happen on the display. The energy signature, the Meridian Cross shuddering on the tracking feed, the numbers updating. Hull damage, Deck 3, Deck 7. The ship did not break. Its emergency systems held. The final count came through 6 minutes later. 600 survivors in full protected sections. The rest had been in partial cover or in transit. 800 people. The number sat in me the way cold things sit in you, deep, motionless. The Shreth broadcast went out across 40 monitored channels simultaneously. A live demonstration for the Galactic Council. Human fragility confirmed. Category Omega obsolete. Request for reclassification submitted. They were still broadcasting when Earth's response came. It was 11 minutes from the moment I made the request to the moment the transmission arrived from Central Command. 11 minutes to travel from my request up the chain to the people with the authority to act, and from them through channels I did not have clearance to see, to whatever came next. No declaration, no warning shot, no ultimatum. One transmission, Earth origin, to every monitored channel the Shreth were broadcasting on. It said, "We will handle it." 3 words. The Shreth warships went dark 11 minutes after that. Not destroyed, no debris, no radiation, no sign of impact or weapon discharge. The 3 points of light on the display simply stopped moving and stopped broadcasting, and the only signals coming from them were emergency beacons, automatic, running on backup power. Just ships adrift, still there, still intact. Whatever had been done to them had been done quietly and completely, and left no evidence that could be called an act of war. It was the cleanest, most deliberate thing I had ever seen done in 11 minutes. The tactical room was completely silent. I set my coffee cup down on the nearest flat surface. Nobody spoke for a long time. The display still showed the 3 dark ships drifting. The Meridian Cross beacon still active, rescue vessels already in transit from the nearest station. The open Shreth broadcast channel still live, broadcasting nothing. Ewan said very quietly, "There it is." He said it the way the Gayori delegate had said it in the council chamber when I had pushed back. The way people say things when they have been waiting to see something, and it has finally arrived. I said, Where are the survivors from the Meridian Cross being taken? Station Reeve, he said, 6 hours out. I want to be on the first transport there. He looked at me. Why? I thought about 800 people. I thought about what it meant to tell 600 survivors that the rest did not make it. I thought about what it meant to be the person in the room who had made a request that ended 3 warships in 11 minutes and still could not stop 800 people from being hurt. I thought about grief as fuel. I thought about an old Drivathi who had watched it from the beginning. Because someone needs to be there, I said, and I am someone. Ewan did not argue. He started arranging the transport. I went back to the observation corridor while I waited. I stood at the window and I looked at the stars and I thought about 6,000 years of getting up. I thought about what it looked like from the outside, from the Drivathi elders' four-direction eyes, from the registry authors who had drawn a circle around us and written, "Do not touch." We grieve, the elder had said, then we rise. I was going to Station Reeve to stand in front of people who had just lost everything, in the middle of a political situation that was going to reshape galactic contact policy for the next century, because someone needed to be there, and I was available, and I knew how to be in a room without flinching. That was the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. We do not do it because we are not afraid. We do it because the thing that comes next is more important than the fear. I did not know if that made us the scariest thing in the galaxy. I only knew it was true. The Council reconvened 31 hours after the Shreth warships went dark. I was not there for the first 6 hours of it. I was at Station Reeve, in the intake corridor, watching rescue staff move survivors from the Meridian Cross through processing. Families, crew members, a woman holding a child who was asleep in a way that meant exhausted and not injured, which was the best thing I saw all day. A man sitting against the wall with his hands between his knees, not moving, not crying, just waiting for his body to decide what to do next. I talked to the ones who wanted to talk. I sat with the ones who did not. I helped carry equipment for the medical team when their cart broke down. I got coffee for 2 crew members who had not slept in 20 hours and who kept apologizing for taking it, which I kept telling them to stop doing. None of them knew who I was. None of them knew what had happened in the Galactic Council chamber, or what the Category Omega classification meant, or what the Shreth had been trying to prove. They just knew their ship had been damaged and some of their people were gone, and they were trying to figure out what came next. 600 people figuring out what came next. I thought about that phrase, the Drivathi elders' phrase, "Then they rise." This was what rising looked like. Not grand, not dramatic. A woman with a sleeping child, a man waiting for his hands to stop shaking, 2 crew members accepting coffee and apologizing for it. This was the thing the rest of the galaxy had been watching for 6,000 years and cataloging under the heading of threat. I left Station Reeve after 6 hours and took the transit back to Kepler Station and walked into the council chamber 14 minutes into a speech by the Gaori representative and sat down at the human table and poured myself water because the coffee on the table was cold. The chamber was different from the first session. The Shreth delegation was absent for obvious reasons. 2 other species had sent their representatives home and were attending remotely, which their protocols allowed in security situations. The Drivathi elder was still in the back corner. Grace Holt slid a written summary across to me without breaking eye contact with the Gaori representative. I read it. 40 minutes of argument about the Category Omega entry. The Fear faction had lost ground since the Shreth situation. You cannot argue that the classification is outdated after what had just happened in 11 minutes. The reclassification upward faction had gained ground. Some were arguing for formal alliance. Owen had written a note at the bottom of the summary in his small, careful handwriting. The elder asked if you were back. I said yes. It said, "Good." The Gaori representative finished speaking. There was a procedural pause. Grace looked at me and raised one eyebrow, which I had learned meant, "Your call." I stood up. 26 representatives, the empty seats where the Shreth had been, the Dravathi elder at the back, all 4 eyes. I said, "I have been asked what humanity wants from this council. I have been asked whether the classification should be changed. I have been asked whether we are safe, whether we are dangerous, whether we are ready, whether we are different from what we were." I paused. "I spent 6 hours this morning at Station Reeve with the survivors of the Meridian Cross." The room was quiet. "They were doing what people do," I said. "They were figuring out what came next, that is all. That is the whole answer to every question this council has been asking." I looked around the room. "You have been watching us for 6,000 years and calling it a threat. What you have been watching is people figuring out what comes next. After everything, every time, that is what we are." I sat down. Grace did not say anything. She poured me coffee from a fresh pot that had appeared at the table sometime in the last minute, and she did not comment on the timing of it, and I did not either. The vote came 3 hours later. Category Omega, maintained. The classification was not changed, not revised, not removed. The warning stayed. The addendum was added by Dravathi request. It was the first Dravathi-authored addition to the Galactic Registry in 400 years. Owen translated it for me afterward, in the corridor outside, standing under the loading rig tracks with the pale blue fabric moving gently overhead. "They grieve," he read. "Then they rise. We have observed this pattern across 6,000 years. We are still calculating where it ends." I read it twice, then I handed it back to him. "Is that good?" he asked. "I think it is honest," I said. He nodded. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. We walked back toward the main corridor, toward the noise and movement of a station that was continuing its business, because stations do. I thought about the registry, the sealed entry, the 14 light-year circle drawn around us by people who had watched us for long enough to be careful. I thought about the Dravathi elder, 6,000 years of watching, still calculating. I thought about a woman with a sleeping child. I thought about the thing that comes next. The coffee on my tray was already going cold. I drank it anyway, every drop of it, then I kept walking. That is the whole human thing. You keep walking.